A warning: this episode contains discussion of sexual assault that may be disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. As a note, we reached out to Tim Ballard's attorney to request an interview, and our request went unanswered. And one last thing. After Tim Ballard left the anti-trafficking organization OUR in 2023, it was renamed OUR Rescue. Its new leaders say they do not condone Tim Ballard's alleged actions while part of the old organization.
I was molested and sexually assaulted by Tim in 4 different states, 5 different countries, in the span of 10 months. Tim manipulated and abused and brainwashed me to a point where I didn't know left from right and right from wrong.
He has ruined so many people's lives. As big as that, my heart was for the mission, and I would do anything for the mission, as far as wanting to save kids. Not anything. I should not say that because what it got me in.
Celeste Borys told me her first one-on-one with Tim Ballard was intense. She was working with Operation Underground Railroad, now known as OUR Rescue, or OUR for short, which was an organization that Ballard began in 2013 with the stated goal of rescuing children around the world from sex trafficking. So naturally, the stakes were high, but even under those circumstances, Ballard really laid it on thick. Celeste was in her office working late when Ballard burst in, slamming the door behind him. He told her that he had asked God who could help him pull off one of his dangerous undercover operations. And he told her that he then saw her face. It must be a sign. They were meant to work together to help free children from enslavement. When someone says that God has hand-chosen you to save children's lives, how do you say no? So, of course she said yes. At that moment, there was no way for her to know what would happen when she and Ballard began working together more closely. There was no way for her to know the ways that Ballard would completely take over her life. And there was no way for her to know how he would take advantage of her trust in one of the most heinous ways imaginable. This is The Opportunist, an original podcast from Podcast One. You're listening to the first episode of a 10-part series on Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad. I'm Sarah James McLaughlin. Remember the summer of 2023? A movie came out that became a surprise hit. It was called Sound of Freedom, and it was about a former U.S. agent turned vigilante who went on a mission to rescue trafficked children in Colombia. You might have heard of it. But you might not know the movie was based on the life of Tim Ballard. And you might not know much about him at all. But we're going to fix that. With a 10-episode deep dive into him, his connections, his organization, and the mounting allegations against him. In this first episode, I dive into the story of Celeste Borys and her experience with Tim Ballard and OUR Rescue. I've spoken with Celeste several times and discussed her shocking allegations, accusing Ballard of unethical behavior during their work together, which have raised serious questions about OUR's methods, leadership, and even its true purpose. But before we get too deep into the specifics of Tim Ballard and the organization he founded, I want to tell the story of Celeste Borys and how she got pulled into OUR's orbit and ultimately sucked into a black hole. Celeste Borys was first introduced to Operation Underground Railroad in the summer of 2021. She was 35 years old, living in northern Utah with her husband and 2 children. Formerly a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as the Mormon Church, she was passionate about volunteering and helping people in any way she could. So OUR's mission was a natural fit.
I joined Operation Underground Railroad to help save kids from sex trafficking.
Celeste was fired up about the cause, even before she was officially hired by the organization. She took the initiative to plan and carry out a huge fundraiser, which brought in nearly $25,000. So it's no surprise she was quickly offered a formal position. Celeste was so passionate about the cause, she was willing to do just about anything to pitch in.
I said, whatever you guys need me to do. If you want me to clean the bathrooms, if that's going to help keep the lights on for the employees and save kids, I'll do that.
Celeste worked for OUR for several months, coordinating volunteer efforts across several states. She was deeply committed to the work, doing whatever was required, attending events, running booths, selling merchandise. In her capacity, she didn't work directly with Tim Ballard yet, but she was aware of his larger-than-life presence. There was no way to escape it. What was your first impression of him? What kind of personality did he have?
When Tim speaks to a crowd, you literally, you can hear a needle drop on the floor. Everybody is silent. He can draw a crowd in because he's so, his stories are so elaborate and believing, and, you cry because they're so beautiful. And I said, it is creepy how people are so obsessed with you. And he goes, I love it. I remember him telling me that. He goes, I love it. I just love it.
It wasn't until October of 2021 that Ballard approached Celeste, albeit in a dramatic fashion, with a new opportunity within OUR.
He said that he was in the middle of working on an operation in London, and he needed to get another female job or operator.
It was a sensitive mission. According to Celeste's victim impact statement, filed as part of her lawsuit against Tim Ballard, this new female operator would need to pose as Tim's girlfriend and get close to a woman who they suspected was being trafficked to help gain information about how to take down the ring.
And he's like, I've been having the hardest time thinking who I could bring because I need somebody right for the job. These things are so particular and I need somebody right. And he goes, I was just driving down the road and I just closed my eyes and I said a prayer. And he goes, I just saw your face. It just popped in my mind. And he goes, and now it's crazy. I walked in the office and you're the only one here. You're the only one here. I was just like, okay, so he didn't even have my information. So he had me write down my phone number. And when I left that night, I was driving home and I literally was like, what the F? That is so weird.
Weirdness aside, Celeste wasn't sure she was cut out for going undercover to break up child sex trafficking rings. For one, she didn't have the background or the training, but instead of addressing her concerns, he merely brushed them off. Instead, he tried to boost her confidence.
I always thought operations were big guys with combat boots running through the door. I go, that's not me at all. And he goes, you'd be surprised, some of the best operators are women. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah. He goes, women are, the kids talk to women on operations. And so women are some of the women are the best operators and have saved so many kids on our ops. And that just made sense to me.
Eventually, Celeste was convinced to join Ballard in his high-stakes operations. From the beginning, there was a sense of cloak and dagger secrecy. Ballard directed Celeste to head to California for training. Ballard was there for a big OUR board meeting, which Celeste had helped plan. This wasn't a normal work trip. He had also challenged her to get to California without telling anyone else where she was going or why. Borys' safety was of little concern. She was traveling alone, and only Ballard knew her whereabouts. If anything were to happen to her, her family wouldn't even know where to look for her, and he would have plausible deniability.
And I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody about it. And that was the first kicker. Like, that was actually like my first test. And he's like, I need you in California this weekend so we can train you. And it was also like, it all happened so fast because it wasn't normal. And he said, but we're going to see if you can get there without anyone seeing. It's like, it was almost like combat training. It was like, let's see if you can get there without anyone knowing.
So Celeste booked herself a flight. When she arrived in California, she was put up in a hotel room, and Ballard came to give her a rundown on how things work in operations. In Celeste's victim statement, filed as part of her lawsuit against Tim Ballard, she writes that she felt uncomfortable when Ballard came into her hotel room.
I remember thinking the very first time he walked into my hotel room, the first time, even as little as like, okay, he's in my hotel room by himself, I felt really uncomfortable. But I couldn't say, hey, maybe let's go to the lobby or let's go to a conference room, because if he were to disagree with me, how awkward would that be? So of course he wouldn't do anything wrong. Of course, he's Tim Ballard. He's Tim Ballard. He's Tim Ballard. So I really had to normalize things until I was so desensitized to the most heinous things.
Ballard launched into an explanation of his undercover alter ego, Brian Black. He would regularly become this character with a fairly low-effort disguise that included a wig and fake tattoos. He also laid out a strategy called the couples ruse. We'll get into this more later, but basically, the couples ruse was a tactic used by Ballard and OUR to provide cover for their operatives. The idea was that when infiltrating sex trafficking rings, OUR members would seem less suspicious if they appeared to be a couple. Working in pairs, they could sort of block each other from having to participate in unethical or compromising behavior. According to Celeste, one example that Ballard gave was a hypothetical situation where two OUR operatives were gathering intel at a strip club. If a dancer tried to give the male operative a lap dance, then the female operative could block this by sitting on his lap instead. Ballard laid out the rules for operations: no kissing or touching private parts, and no being alone with escorts. But Ballard warned that certain things had to be convincing to pull off this ruse. Celeste says Ballard warned that traffickers could smell pheromones, and so they had to make their chemistry seem real, which might even involve simulating sex. Now, granted, people engaged in risky illegal activities like human trafficking would be on alert for potential undercover agents. But it's a little over the top for Ballard to say they could smell pheromones. Traffickers are still humans. They don't somehow have a superhuman sense of smell. So Ballard was probably playing up the threat of exposure to manipulate female operators. So he basically told you needed to pretend to be his girlfriend, and that if you deviated from that you were putting children at risk.
Yeah.
So when you found yourself in this situation, did you trust him?
It wasn't even that. It was more so my life was at risk.
In her victim statement, Celeste recalled being gobsmacked by all this information and wondering if HR was going to pop out of the closet to stop what Ballard was doing and saying. But no one showed up to question what was happening. The organization seemed to promote a culture that said, this is business as usual. And so Celeste was pulled deeper into Ballard's schemes.
Yeah, I mean, it was stressful because it wasn't normal. It was stressful, but it was stressful in a sense that I wasn't a trained operator, but it was normal for Tim. Like Tim said, it was normal. Like this was normal work that operators do.
As if it wasn't bad enough that Ballard had sprung all of this information on Celeste, he then proceeded to physically force himself on her. According to her victim impact statement, before Ballard left her hotel room, he hugged Celeste, then lifted her shirt to look at her stomach. He commented on her body, saying he didn't know she was so hot because she was always covered up at the office. Ballard then pulled Celeste into him and kissed her neck. With all of their clothes still on, he had her lay down on the bed, wrapped one of her legs over his shoulder, and thrust his hips forward, demonstrating how to simulate sex without actual penetration. Ballard had taken her passion for helping children and used it to lure her hundreds of miles away from home, get her alone, and take advantage of her. And Ballard swore Celeste to complete secrecy about her operations training and made her keep up with the full-time job she was already working on top of her new duties. That meant she was essentially working 2 jobs for the price of one, and it left her with little time for herself or her family.
I was Tim's executive assistant for the better part of 12 months. During that time, I was the closest person to Tim. I traveled with him around the world, thinking we were saving kids and doing something good.
Over time, Ballard became increasingly unstable and emotionally dependent on Celeste. She said he would call around the clock, straining her relationship with her husband to a breaking point. Ballard further manipulated Celeste's emotions by claiming that he would, quote, put a bullet in his head if she ever left him and the organization.
I also served as his personal therapist at all hours of the day and night. I had to be available 24/7 to give assurances to Tim of what a great guy he is to navigate his emotional meltdowns and his threat of suicide. No one did anything to protect me. I worked tirelessly day and night for the good of the cause. I sacrificed time I can never get back from my family, my kids, and my husband. For my efforts and my sacrifice, I was left with a broken marriage, a broken spirit.
Up next, Tim Ballard's mind games and manipulations escalate, dragging Celeste across the globe and leading to multiple criminal allegations. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you ever feel like you have to put on a mask to get through interactions? We all wear masks sometimes, whether at work, with friends, or even around family. But wouldn't it feel amazing to take off that mask, to accept all parts of yourself? Therapy can help you do that. It's about learning positive coping skills, setting boundaries, and becoming the best version of yourself. With BetterHelp, you can start your journey towards personal growth. BetterHelp is entirely online, designed to fit your schedule. All you need to do is fill out a short questionnaire and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time with no extra cost. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/opportunist today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/opportunist. When you think about businesses with wildly impressive sales, like Thrive Cosmetics with its mission-driven beauty products, or Cotopaxi, known for its ethical outdoor gear, you think about great products, strong brands, and marketing that really connects. But what often gets overlooked is the business behind the business, making selling and buying seamless. For millions of businesses, that secret to success is Shopify. Running a business takes a lot of work, and success often comes from what's happening behind the scenes. You need more than just a great product. You need the right tools to make your business grow. That's where Shopify comes in. Shopify is the platform that makes selling simple, with the best checkout experience on the planet with tools like Shop Pay, which boosts conversions up to 50%. That's fewer abandoned carts and more. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Cotopaxi uses with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/OPP, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/OPP to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/OPP. Now, back to the story. In 2021, Celeste Borys started out volunteering and fundraising for Tim Ballard's Operation Underground Railroad, now called OUR Rescue. She was soon offered a full-time position and swept up into Ballard's shadowy inner circle. Ballard began training Celeste to go undercover using a highly questionable and thoroughly manipulative strategy called the couples ruse.
It wasn't until I was in another country in the middle of a very hard position in a operation, different country, not speaking the language, completely ambushed, that he threw me in a couple's ruse that I had no idea how to get out of.
Right, like you were kind of in a vulnerable position where you had to listen and you had to do what he said.
Yeah. And I didn't even realize. So fast forward to the beginning of this year, like when I was out of all of it, I did not even understand how I got into all the positions that I was in.
In 2022, Ballard took Celeste with him to Ecuador to conduct another practice operation to prepare her for the mission in London. While undercover, Ballard and Celeste went for a couples massage with two young female massage therapists. Celeste didn't speak Spanish, but Ballard did. And she says he appeared to steer the conversation with the young women towards sex, ostensibly to see if he could get any leads on traffickers. Ballard asked the women how often they masturbated and how they touched themselves. One of the massage therapists offered to demonstrate on Celeste. Ballard then physically rolled Celeste over onto her back, clearing the way for the masseuse to sexually assault Celeste, moving her hands over Celeste's genitals. Believing that there were children's lives at stake, Celeste did her best to stay in character, despite being extremely uncomfortable. But when she felt fingers penetrate her, it became too much for her to take. She got up, went into the bathroom, and cried. Ballard went after her while she was still undressed and vulnerable. Celeste says he complimented her, saying she was a badass and that she had done better than any other female operative. Basically, he broke her down by obliterating her boundaries and agency so that he could build her back up with words of comfort. Then, he would play his signature move, reminding Celeste of all the kids they were going to save. He even said he had gotten some information from the masseuses, which would lead to trafficked children. He assured Celeste that she shouldn't feel sad or guilty about anything that had happened, because all of her pain and discomfort was worth it.
And so from then it was like an ambush. But my next stop was London, and it's like my brain didn't have the capacity to even understand what had happened. But he normalized it by the time we got to the ambush couples ruse technique.
That word, normalized, is key here, because if Ballard had come right out of the gate putting Celeste in uncomfortable sexual situations, she likely would have backed out right away, because that would have felt inappropriate and unacceptable. But by slowly pushing her boundaries further and further, he was able to trap her in a cycle of justification.
Like, you had a really normal, because he was fine. And here I am going, this is my boss, the CEO, founder of Operation Underground Railroad, and who everybody lifts up and who is respectful. And not that I'm explaining him that I idolized him, but he just made it seem so okay that I had to normalize it.
A couple months later, Ballard took Celeste to Mexico City for another practice operation. To gather intel, Ballard ordered 2 female escorts. This time, Ballard upped the ante and had Celeste pretend that she wanted to become an escort herself. He even had her take full-body, scantily clad boudoir photos to support the cover story. Here's where Ballard pushed Celeste's boundaries even further. Celeste wrote that the ploy ended up with her sitting on the bed, watching while a naked woman crawled all over Ballard, giving her tips on how to please a man. Finally, after months of practice, it was time to conduct the London operation, which was what Ballard wanted her help with in the beginning. The goal was to confirm whether a certain escort was being trafficked. To get this information from the escort, Ballard ordered her services for the night, and then, so they didn't seem like narcs, he had Celeste again participate in the couple's ruse. This time, Ballard made Celeste straddle his lap while he pointed out the different chakras on her body, one of which is in the chest area and another is in the groin. Ballard then put on a show, pretending to take a shower with Celeste and even making sex noises to sell the performance. Apparently that was enough to earn the woman's trust to the point that she gave them the information they needed. So, mission accomplished. But after that, Ballard didn't just let Celeste go back to her desk job. He had more and more missions for Celeste to complete, including a disastrous operation in Mexico, where Ballard escalated his manipulation and abuse to new heights.
And I was like a disaster. The whole weekend was a disaster. But so when I got to the office and this, it was just the whole, from walking up to his office and him just standing in a towel right out of the shower was shocking in itself. But every time something like that happened with Tim, it was so uncomfortable that you really had to normalize it to feel comfortable.
That he was able to normalize what happened next really is a testament to the months and months that he had spent manipulating situations and eradicating Celeste's boundaries. According to Celeste's victim impact statement, she and Ballard were at OUR offices preparing for a trip to Mexico, this time for Ballard to meet with the country's Attorney General in addition to another information gathering operation. Celeste was gathering the supplies they'd need for the mission, including the wig that Ballard wore to transform into his alter ego, Ryan Black. During these rushed preparations, Celeste said Ballard ambushed her.
When I got there and I said, "Get dressed, I'll go get the wig," and I knew the wig was in the closet around the corner, I waited a few minutes and I asked if he was dressed and he said yes. And when I went back to the bathroom, he was standing there completely naked. And it's almost, I remember freezing, and he pushed me against the wall and slammed me. He could be 1 second this charismatic guy who is mesmerizing a whole 1,000 people crowd, talking about spiritual stuff, and you feel it. You're like, oh my gosh, this guy is this has saved so many kids. This is so cool. And then he could walk off the stage and get in a car and be psychotic and neurotic and crazy. And that's how it was. It was a flip of the switch. You never knew what was coming after you. And so it was as soon as I walked around the corner, when he, slammed me against the wall, it's like lights out. I had no idea, but it was animalistic, right coming after me. And then lights out. And then the next thing I know, I'm just wiping, and I couldn't keep, the whole thing, you're just trying to make sense of everything. But everything happens so fast with Tim. And he's always so over, and you don't know if he's in Brian Black mode or Tim Ballard mode.
Celeste's memories of the attack are disjointed, which is common in cases of assault. But she remembers the aftermath very clearly.
I remember being on the bathroom floor and my clothes were not off. They were scrunched up. But I was on the floor, and this has always been like a really hard, and obviously all of it's very embarrassing. But I remember just kind of almost waking up going, why am I messy? I felt messy. And I stood up and I was wiping off my stomach and kind of around my legs, and I didn't know what I was wiping off. And because my brain, it's almost like my brain wasn't like fixing, it's really hard to explain.
Even as Celeste's brain refused to process certain devastating details of what had happened to her, another part of her kicked into gear to keep doing her job.
And I was angry. I just remember being angry. And then my next thought was, we got to get to the airport. We got to get to the airport. It was always like, we got to do this. We got to do this. Because I was always like, next point, next move, next move.
But even with her astonishing level of focus on the job, she and Ballard didn't make their flight. Instead of heading to the gate, Ballard settled into one of the airport's bars and caused them both to miss the flight. She didn't realize it at the time, but OUR had been tracking her phone. She got an angry call demanding to know why they weren't on the plane.
I missed the flight because he sexually assaulted me. Because I couldn't comprehend all that. I was always apologizing for it.
Meanwhile, Celeste was talked down by Janet Rusin, another woman in Ballard's inner circle. Actually, she was a Mormon psychic who Ballard relied on heavily, but we'll get into that later.
She said to me on the phone, she goes, honey, let's pray. And I was like, I don't want to fucking pray. I'm like, I don't want to pray. I was so freaked out. I was like, I just want to go home. Like, this is so wrong. I was so freaked out. And I was like, okay, maybe it'll make me feel better. But it was like, looking back now, there was always tied in that spiritual manipulation. And it's so wrong. It's just so wrong. But you're just grasping to hold on to anything that makes you feel comfort or better or anything, really.
Given the incredible stress Celeste was under, she asked if they could cancel their scheduled meeting that night with Julie, an alleged human trafficker that Celeste had worked to befriend. But Ballard insisted the meeting go on as planned. So Celeste was forced to gather herself and once again go undercover as an escort in training. And unlike Ballard, who wore a disguise, Celeste said she was not given anything to hide her true identity while on these operations. According to her victim impact statement, Celeste was sent out to get more cash for Brian Black to pay the girls he had requested for the evening. On her way back to the hotel, Celeste was torn. Part of her wanted to delay her return as long as possible because she couldn't stand the idea of resuming the operation with Ballard. But another part of her wanted to arrive more quickly because she was concerned for the safety of the women Ballard might be meeting without her there.
And I'm like, if he gets in the hot tub with her, I don't feel safe for her. I started not feeling safe for her, even though I was told she was a trafficker, but she was still a woman. Like, I just couldn't, something was off.
When Celeste arrived back at the hotel with the cash, her fears were confirmed.
I get in the elevator and I go all the way to the top, and the elevator doors start opening, and I could hear, it was like a movie scene. I could hear Brian Black and Julie walking to the elevator doors, and I could not shut those doors fast enough. I couldn't even be excited to see her because I was so upset throughout for what had happened over the last couple of days. Well, the elevator doors didn't shut in time, and she was like, Celeste, and I was like, no, and so I had to so hard be like, hi.
At this point, all of the illusions around OUR's operations were coming down. Supposedly, the whole reason Celeste was there was to provide cover so Ballard wouldn't be alone with any escorts. That was one of Ballard's two major rules of the couples ruse, and something Ballard insisted on in OUR planning meetings. Operators weren't allowed to be left alone. But Ballard wasn't even pretending to follow his own rules anymore.
And of course, they went down to the hot tub like right away, and he went down alone, and that like debunks the couples ruse that he is claims that is, is legitimate, and he's never alone with women, and he went down with her, and I couldn't do anything about it.
At this point, Ballard's true colors had come out in a way that no disguise could hide. But leaving Ballard and OUR was still easier said than done. Up next, Tim Ballard's carefully built facade starts to crumble as he faces mounting pressure from accusations of assault and impropriety. Now, back to the story. In the aftermath of the sexual assault, Celeste Borys had to figure out how to untangle herself from Ballard's web of lies and manipulation. But it was difficult to speak out about what Ballard had done to her because she had been sworn to secrecy. Ballard maintained that anything having to do with the group's undercover operations was privileged. Few others even knew the extent to which Celeste had been involved. And while it's easy to think that someone who has been sexually assaulted would immediately run away and flee their abusers, in real life that doesn't really happen all that often. Especially when your abuser has been manipulating you to assume his actions are for a higher purpose. And of course, Ballard was highly motivated to keep Celeste quiet. To silence her and keep her from putting together what was really going on, Ballard kept Celeste out of the OUR office, so she was out of the loop about what was happening. Celeste's life contracted even more than before. She was cut off from the rest of the organization working with Ballard one-on-one, which allowed him to strengthen his hold and continue to manipulate her. Celeste wrote in her victim impact statement that in January 2023, Ballard made her drive him to a ketamine therapy session. Allegedly, while under the influence of this tranquilizer, Ballard went into a trance and received several revelations, which Celeste was tasked with writing down. Among these was that Celeste was an actual angel, and that he and Celeste had been married in a past life. In his impact statement, Celeste's husband suggested that Ballard did all of this to intentionally manipulate her. Ballard also kept up his campaign of praise and compliments, saying that Celeste was the best operator and that he trusted her more than anyone else. But even this apparent adulation had a dark side. Ballard maintained that he would kill himself if Celeste ever tried to leave her position with him. Ballard's own situation continued to deteriorate, and in June 2023, he was forced out of the group that he had founded. At this point, he essentially tendered a resignation for Celeste, saying that she was leaving with him so he could keep his hold over her. But he did this without her knowledge. It wasn't until Celeste read her severance paperwork from OUR carefully that she realized she was being terminated and not just transferred to another initiative. Ballard kept her on the hook by dangling the prospect of a new job in front of her. He promised there was a job with a guaranteed salary at this next anti-trafficking endeavor, the Spear Fund. But that salary never materialized. So Celeste was even worse off than before. She's out of a legitimate job and expected to work for free, plus cover significant expenses. The stress of all these factors, on top of the emotional blackmail and isolation from her family, made it difficult for Celeste to cut ties with Ballard. He tried to put himself at the center of her world to make sure she never abandoned him.
I realize that some of you will say, why didn't you leave? Or why didn't you speak up sooner? The answer is I still don't know. The level of manipulation that Tim Ballard used is hard to comprehend. There are reasons victims stay with their abusers, and crimes of this nature go unreported, especially when the man in question is powerful, connected, worshipped, and protected by Utah's Attorney General.
It's difficult for a victim to come out against their abuser in any circumstance. But it's especially hard when that person has been cut off from their support system and they fear retribution from powerful allies. Still, Celeste somehow found the strength to break away from Ballard.
It wasn't until I was able to get away from Tim's grasp and influence that I realized who he really was. The pain of the trauma of what really happened to me didn't even really start to sink in until Tim's control over me subsided.
Since Celeste resigned, she's been able to look back and recognize these tactics were all mind games and manipulation for his personal gain. But accepting these realizations isn't a simple or straightforward process.
I'm so angry because I worked at OUR for so long before Tim got a hold of me. And like they were my friends, right? Like I made relationships with these people that they were supposed to protect me. And I literally feel like they trafficked me to Tim so Tim could traffic me around several countries and several states. And they still aren't taking responsibility for it. And I'm like, I don't want anything from you other than just to acknowledge that that's so wrong. That's so wrong. You can't do this to people. And the thing is so hurtful that it's like they knew what he was doing. They knew he had done this in the past, and they still allowed him to work with women. They still allowed him to work with me, and they knew who I was. I was their employee. I was their friend.
It's not just that OUR, which has now been rebranded OUR Rescue, isn't supporting her.
I was a liability to them at that point because they were trying to really fundraise off of Sound of Freedom. And so they thought, well, Celeste is a loose end. She's with Tim. And so once she starts to wake up from this mess of Tim, we need to really, she's a loose end. We need to do as much as we can to like, whatever, destroy her basically, And you're like, this guy doesn't believe me. He doesn't believe me. It was so hard. And so when I came home and a few days later, I was talking to my husband, I was like, all these police officers just want me to like, okay, this assault happened here. I only report it here. This assault happened here. I can only report it here. This assault happened. I'm like, that's going to take me forever because I've been all over the world with this guy.
I wanted to make a difference and be the light in the darkness. I wanted to help fight the bad guys. Instead, I became an easy target for the worst guy of all. In saving kids and helping trafficking victims, I unknowingly became a victim myself. The very organization that claims to fight traffickers turned me over to the trafficker.
As of now, the many cases against Ballard are still developing. Celeste's case is unique in one very important way. So one of the things that sort of sets your suit apart is that you actually have physical evidence. You have his DNA on a piece of your clothing. This would be the skirt she was wearing during the assault she described after Ballard got out of the shower.
There's DNA on the skirt. It is positive. And I have appeals to get it in hand, but we are in the process of all that because I am terrified it is going to disappear.
Celeste went through months of appeals to get the official confirmation that the DNA on her skirt was a match for Ballard. Then, in early October 2024, her legal team finally received an acknowledgement from Ballard's lawyers that the DNA in question was in fact from Ballard. According to Ballard's counsel, he was so excited by meeting up with an escort for intelligence gathering purposes that he couldn't control himself and masturbated, ejaculating onto Celeste's skirt. No explanation for how or why he had her skirt in his hotel room, or why he decided that that was a reasonable course of action. So there you have it, the best defense Ballard can muster. Also, in early October 2024, Celeste was finally granted a protective order against Ballard, which means he can no longer contact her or come within 250 feet of her. This is an important step in securing Celeste's safety. But there are people who believe this evidence should be enough to finally put Ballard behind bars. I also spoke with investigative journalist Damian Moore, who was one of the first to take a hard look at Ballard. Moore highlighted how strange it is that Ballard seems to have been shielded from the consequences of accusations like Celeste, which is bolstered by physical evidence.
Utah County Sheriff's Office has refused to come forward with that information. Had anyone else been accused of rape or sexual assault, they would have been arrested based on that information. Tim Ballard was not. So he's still getting a lot of cover from law enforcement agencies, from a lot of his political associates.
But Celeste isn't just scared that Ballard will be able to influence the case. She's afraid that he might even retaliate against her.
Has he made any threats to you?
Yes, he has. And I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. That's another disturbing thing. Like, the more he talks, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. And that's another thing where I'm like, even if the police are on my side and they're trying to do everything they can, they're not protecting us. They're not protecting us here in Utah. No one knows him the way I know him. Like, he's so unhinged. Like, nobody knows him that way. And I've seen him at his worst.
In her victim impact statement, Celeste wrote that Ballard's reputation as a well-connected, respectable, church-going hero made her feel powerless to speak out against him. And she fully understands why some of his victims are scared to death to come forward. And that she's heard him say, "They have one stone, I have 1,000. And he's also made coded threats, like this video he posted on Instagram from September 2023, where he's sitting in a car pointing to a bunch of guns strapped to the back of the passenger seat.
But first of all, don't try to mess with me because I got a whole arsenal right here.
I feel like I'm in the middle of the street screaming and the police are just like walking around doing nothing, you know? How I feel about Tim, he needs to go to jail. And that's not even me being like, oh, I'm angry. It's just, he has ruined so many people's lives, and not even mine, but just like the ripple effect of lives. Like, if he just did this to one person, the ripple effect to that person and that person's families. But he has done this for years, and not even the sexual abuse, but like just relationships and the emotional abuse and the physical abuse and the just so much. Like, it's just, you can't do this to people, you know?
Celeste has been forever changed by her ordeal with Tim Ballard and OUR. She'll never regain the trust that was broken and taken advantage of.
The hardest part is losing so much time. Like, I feel like I've lost so much of my life because this started just not only this last year, but I volunteered with OUR like in, 2020 is when I first started volunteering. In my heart, I just fell in love with the cause. So I feel like I've lost so much time, and that's what's so depressing right there.
But still, the situation isn't hopeless.
It's been a year. I'm in a much better place today than I was last September. But and my story, like all of our stories, are so they put us through so much. But I'm just grateful I'm out. I'm just so grateful I'm out.
I can't even imagine what that feels like, though, to look back on that and feel like that's not you and try to piece all of that together. That sounds horrible.
It's been a definite journey this whole last year, and it's been a huge process. But it's almost as if I've been in a coma this whole time, and I'm waking up trying to process all of it because I literally have been a walking zombie, and he has been able to take and do whatever he's wanted to do with me and used me. I trusted him and I believed it.
I hope that coming out publicly can help ensure that no woman has to suffer at the hands of Tim Ballard ever again.
Do you feel like Tim understands consequences?
No, I honestly think, because he is literally the cult leader of the stuff he has going on, I really truly think he thinks he's getting off free. I really do. I think he thinks he's gonna get off free. I really do.
Despite the deck stacked against her, Celeste isn't backing down.
My mom, she actually told me, she was like, they did not know what they were doing when they decided to come after you, because you may be, like, my heart is big. I'm coming back at you, and we are gonna freaking stick. I will not back down. Like, I am not, no matter what it takes. You can't do this to people.
As of now, OUR Rescue is still operating, though without Ballard at the helm. However, Celeste doesn't think that removing Ballard from leadership has done enough to change the character of the organization that he founded and shaped for a decade.
I'll give it to you there. Like, you're a new OUR, you're changing things. But the fact of the matter is this: you're a new OUR for whatever you've changed up, but you are literally shaming all these women that 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 your old OUR has trafficked and abused and shamed and manipulated, because you have admitted that you've ousted Tim Ballard. So you know it, and you still are shaming us, and you're suing me. Like, they're literally suing me.
Yeah, what's their message supposed to be, really, if that's the way they're going to treat women who have been trafficked? Is it different because you're not a child? Is it different because you're in the United States? Or is it just different because it's tied to them?
Yeah.
There shouldn't be a difference, and organizations founded to end child sex trafficking shouldn't turn around and exploit and abuse women in the process. But that's what seems to have happened in the case of Tim Ballard and OUR.
Tim manipulated and abused and brainwashed me to a point where I didn't know left from right and right from wrong. We were always under some kind of spiritual attack, under immense danger, and everyone was always out to get us because we were exposing evil pedophiles. The truth is, the only evil I really saw was Tim Ballard and what he did to me. Looking back now, I know it was all an elaborate ploy just to justify Tim's wicked desires.
And as I mentioned, Celeste Borys is not alone. Her story is only one of the many disturbing things we have discovered about Tim Ballard. You won't believe what else I found. On the next episode of The Opportunist, Tim Ballard, Unmasking a Hero, we dive into Tim Ballard's extraordinary rise to fame, the lies that paved the way to fame and fortune. Thank you for tuning in to The Opportunist. This episode was written by Nani Okwalagu, produced by Abby Newhouse, and executive produced by Connor Powell. Continue listening for a special second episode of The Opportunist. Until next time.